And welcome back to Flexible Games, where we are continuing our journey and updating all of our mods, all of my mods for Vintage Story. Now, I've done quite a few. Um, Ironically, the very first one I try is the one that kind of gives me a little hitch, but we sorted that out. We got the bug fixed, and everything is good. The Building Gadgets mod, that updated just fine. Although somebody did report a bug like 3 months ago with this, but nobody has corroborated that. Nobody has, like, typically when I get bug reports that are really isolated, or you have one person that just sort of vaguely describes a bug, typically I don't look into it too hard, just because that there could be a myriad of reasons why that bug exists for that individual. Like, why is that individual the only one that has reported the bug? If 200 or 300 people have downloaded the mod, why is that the only one that I get a report on? So in the end, I basically say, okay, what are the odds that there's something else going on that this person ran into? It's pretty high when you get one bug report in 6 months from one person. So, I'll do my own testing. I'll fire up an actual world and play an actual world once I get everything updated. And then, we'll try it out myself. And if the bug exists, then I'll definitely try to fix it. Crafting table updated without a hitch. Load everything up, recompile. It works just fine. Flexible tools, same thing, updated just fine. And now we're on the Night Watcher. You notice I'm skipping right now. I'm skipping the mods that don't have code. I'll do those after I get all the code updated. Then I'll go back, because the other mods, especially like the random changes, there's a ton of stuff in there. And any number of those things can break. So I want to do those. I want to do those separately on their own. So the Night Watcher, this was made. I think this might have been my very second mod that I coded, because it's basically my version of the Mega Torch from Minecraft. I wanted a way to block drifter spawns around my home base, and this was before they changed the way drifters spawn. So it was before, at night, drifters would spawn and they would come to your house and they would moan and groan, and it was annoying. So the Night Watcher prevented drifter spawns in a radius around. Now it's rifts. Rifts spawn in. I'm not a fan of those either, and I have not found a way to prevent those from spawning. I'd need to spend a few hours digging into the code in the game. I'm sure there's possibly a way, but they're not entities. The rifts that spawn, from what I understand, are not entities. So I can't just hook into the entity spawner. It's a whole different subsystem that I would have to break into. So usually when I generate the worlds, I just generate them without rifts, because I don't like the rifts at all. So the Night Watcher mainly now is more of a spawn preventer for other things. They still prevent drifter spawns. If you keep rifts on, and a rift spawns close to your base or in your base, as I've had it before, and you have a Night Watcher, it still will prevent the drifters from spawning. So be aware of that. It is still functional for drifter spawns. One person asked for wolves to be added, and so the last version I updated it and prevented, had an option to prevent wolves. And now somebody asked, hey, can you add bears to the list? Now, there's an argument that could be said to, instead of individually having flags saying, prevent wolves, prevent bears, prevent rabbits, prevent, instead of doing, instead of having an individual line for those, you could have a array of strings that's just a whitelist of things to prevent, right? But not everybody is going to know what the entity like tag is. This code tag, right? This code is everything in the game has a code. Everything. And the game, everything is based on the code. So when you see, if you remember the angel belt dash on, angel belt dash off, that was the code for that object, on and off. So each object gets a code, and each state of that object gets a code. Each variant of an object gets a code. Everything has a code. It's the unique identifier for everything in the game. And they can be generated pretty easily. You can create a mod that generates 10,000, different unique codes, and just, I'm kind of against mods that add just a bunch of variants for no reason. Anyway, so rather than try to implement something super complicated that I will definitely not be able to get done in the 10 to 20 minutes that I want this episode to last, we're just going to add a line item to prevent bears, because apparently somebody was being harassed by bears and we want to prevent those. So first thing we need to do is go into config, and the config object, right? Night Watcher config is a very simple object. It has to be. It has to be a very, very simple object with a very simple constructor, and it has default values, right? Very simple object, because the game automatically generates these config files, and you want them to initiate with their default values. So we are going to public bool block bears equals false. Oh, let's actually spell that right. How about? So, and then we're going to add this block bears equals false. See how it's just brilliant. Coding, compared to what it was 30 years ago when I started, coding has come a long, long ways, and the IntelliSense is just a game changer. All right, so that is the config. Now we need to make sure that the config, can be updated if there is an error. Load mod config surrounding this call with a try catch in case the user made a typo while changing the configuration. Okay, that is an important thing. So I'm not doing that yet, which is a bad idea, because let's say they have an old version of the mod that has the old version of the config, and now we have a new version of the config that has another thing on it. Well, when the game tries to automatically load the config, it's going to run into a value that it doesn't know how to do it, and it might fail. And if it fails, that might throw an exception. So we're gonna put a try catch around this thing here. Okay. Does not exist in the current context. Which means this config, I need to declare outside of the try catch, because it's the value is in there. So if this fails, we actually want to regenerate it. Yeah. So we're going to copy this. We're going to do that. And we're going to do that. Okay. So what happens is we declare it and we initiate it, we instantiate it, and we just set it to null. We're not really instantiating. It's just we're declaring it. This, if this succeeds, it will give us a watcher config object. Okay, it'll load all those variables and give us that object. If it fails, it will likely keep this as null, which, boom, this picks that up. If it's null, we regenerate it. Regenerating default config as it was missing or broken. So we then call store mod config, watcher config. We declare a new one, and we make sure that we actually save it out. Okay, and then we set the watcher config to the thing, and then I set the global variable for the mod, the config value for it. So that will give us a little bit of protection from hard crashes. You want to prevent hard crashes as much as possible. All right, so this is a very simple mod. You know, we register the item, we register the entity, because it's not a block. The Night Watcher isn't a block. So it's actually an entity that doesn't move around, right? It's just like a drifter. It's like a bunny rabbit. It's an entity, but it's not moving around. And the reason for that is because it's in the same vein as other things that spawn, and it makes it really easy to capture that spawn event because it's an entity itself. So in here we initialize it. We capture the event on try spawn entity, and we say, hey, I want to intercept that. And then, so this spawn interceptor is called whenever the game tries to spawn an entity. Anytime it spawns an entity, it hooks in and calls this code. So you don't want a huge amount of code in here. You want it to be very, very simple and very, very fast. So we're going to check if nightwatcher.nwconfig.block bears and entity properties.code.path.starts with fast bear. I'm gonna guess. We're gonna look this up in a second. So we're gonna go here into the code. So vintage story, assets, survival. I mean, it could be in game. Most likely it's in survival. Entities. Okay. Here's all the entities. Land. Right. So you can see this starts with wolf. If we go down here, you can see wolf female, wolf male, wolf pup. Again, these are the codes unique to the entities. So you don't have one file for wolf. You have one for each type of wolf. Same with drifters. I think they're called drifter. I guess he'd sort of pile. I mean, it wasn't consistent, but if you open this file, you can see the variant groups: normal, deep, tainted, corrupt, nightmare, double-headed. Right. So how the game builds the code, it dynamically builds code. So it starts with the code of the main object, drifter, and then any variants are dashed after that. So drifter dash normal, drifter dash deep. So when I capture starts with, all I'm capturing is that very first drifter, not the dash, not anything after that, just drifter. Because they can get really long. You can get a lot of variant groups depending on different things, right? I'm sure that there are mods that show you like if you've done the hotkey or the keyback command to show you that path, show you that code, they can get really long. And sometimes it's hard to find stuff inside of there. But I'm assuming that we're going to start with bear. There is bear. So in here, bear, we have gender and then type. So, believe it or not, this would build bear dash male dash brown, bear dash female dash polar. So you can see the more of those varying group lists you add, the exponential amount of codes that you generate. So you gotta be careful. Don't create mods that generate thousands of these things, because it just takes forever for the game to generate them. So this actually generates quite a few. You can look at this, multiply it by this, right? Bear, that's the standard. They all have bear. So 2 times 5. This is 10 different entity codes that this generates. And then you can separate based on those codes. You can separate collisions, textures. You can individual by the code. You can individual set all of those. You can set basically any attributes per code, per individual code that you want. So here's textures by type, size by type, and the by type is the indicator of different codes. So you can see the star indicates anything before that. So all black bears, right? All brown bears, all sun bear. I don't know what is a sun bear. I don't know what a sun bear. Panda bear, polar bear. And then behaviors, animations. I'm pretty sure you can have any of these by type that you want. I'm not 100% sure on that, but just so you know. So yeah, bear is the right thing to use there. So starts with bear. So we want double distance equals this dot server position. This, when you use a this keyword in C#, it just means the object that I am, right? The object that is ticking right now. So if you place one of these in the world and it's ticking, this is what it is. If you have two objects, let's say you have a night watcher over here and a night watcher over here. This is, when this ticks, this means this one. When this ticks, this means this one. So it's just what I am. This keyword is the object that I am. So this is what I am. The server position is where I am in the server, where I'm in the world, basically. Dot distance to, and then spawn position. Spawn position is passed into this interceptor. It's what the game calls, because the game is like, I want to spawn XYZ, you know, some random loop generator is happening, and it's like, I need to spawn something. Something random happened, I need to spawn this. And so it knows where it wants to spawn it, because that's a whole nother effect of randomly, you know, if you're in a cave, it's trying to find a spot to spawn it. When it finds a spot, when it has an entity and it has a spot, it calls spawn entity, and we intercept that. So we have access to all of the variables of that object that it wants to spawn. We know the block accessor. So this is basically like the block that it wants to spawn on. It's the entity properties that it wants to spawn, basically the entity that it's wanting to spawn, the position that is spawning in, and the herd ID is when it actually spawns groups of animals, it'll spawn them in a herd instead of just one at a time individually. This is why when you are out in the world, you can come across a male and a female and a baby sheep, for example. They spawn as a herd, and so it's a herd ID of that unit. And so it's also ties into the entity behavior. If you attack the female sheep, the male sheep is going to attack you, right? Because it's part of the same herd. So, but basically, we just copy this code up here. We could add an OR here, but I'm assuming that somebody's going to want to see this. Distance is less than or equal to nightwatcher.nw config.effect radius. Return false. And return false, what that does is it overrides the tree. Any call, right? When the game calls spawn, any other mod, any other feature that ties into that, right? Any of those, there could be 50 different pieces of code that all look at the same data, right? If any of them return false, the entire system is aborted and the spawn is aborted. If any of them return false. And so by returning false here, it goes all the way up to the top of the tree and says, we have a return false, don't spawn the entity, right? You could change values in here. You could change the properties of the entity and return true, and then it would spawn the entity with the new properties, right? So things like that are definitely possible. The spawn drifter here, basically, what this does is I have it checked to see if we're gonna block it. But then I have I grab the mod system, the temporal storms, the periodic storms, and if the storm is active, and we're within range, prevent the spawn only if the blocking storm is true. So if this is true and the spawn block during storm, that has to be true. Normally by default it was false. If block during storm and there is a storm, block the thing. Otherwise, only block if there's not a storm, essentially. Right? A little bit of repeated code in here, but it makes it easier to read. It just makes it easier to read for me anyway. But anyway, yeah, now we have a bare blocking system in here. And we hopefully protected ourselves a little bit when it comes to loading the config. We put it into a try catch. Not 100% sure. This doesn't tell you it doesn't tell you what kind of exception is thrown. So exception E, just to get any of them, right? Get any of them. But don't do anything. I mean, all it does is prevent a hard crash. If you're ever playing a mod and the game just closes, this is definitely part of Minecraft. If you're playing a mod and the game just shuts down and closes and there's a hard crash, that's because this doesn't exist. A try catch catches those exceptions and prevents a catastrophic failure from happening. Okay. So we're good with that. So now we're going to just put this in release. I'm pretty confident I want to just make sure I set these right, because when I apply them, when I update the GitHub, I just want everything to look good. Assembly info I've already set. 1.4 is the new version, or it's going to be the new version. Yeah, I think we want to build, rebuild, and we are 2 files copied, which is good. Let's go up here. Night Watcher mod. There's the code. You can see time is right about perfect. I removed the PB whatever, PDB or whatever that file is. That is a debug. That is a file that has all of the tokens and all of the information of the DLL in it. When you debug, you need to use it. When you do a release, I don't know why it generates it, but when you do a release, it's not supposed to. And so, okay, so there's 1.4. We have that. And then I just highlight that and send to compress zip -1.18-1.4. And there's the new file ready to upload. Glorious, right? So, yeah, I hope everybody learned at least something today about this process. And yeah, when we come back, we'll probably try to tackle a non-code mod. Try to, try to see how many things have changed in the new version. I hope it's not many. But anyway, I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.